The debt ceiling is a legal limit on how much the federal government can borrow to pay its bills. It was first created by Congress during World War I to give the Treasury Department more flexibility in financing the war effort. Since then, it has been raised 78 times by both Republican and Democratic presidents. But now, the debt ceiling has become a source of political conflict and economic uncertainty. The U.S. reached its current limit of $31.4 trillion in January, and the Treasury Department has been using accounting tricks to keep paying its obligations. However, these extraordinary measures will run out soon, and the U.S. could default on its debt as early as June 1st. A default would mean that the U.S. would not be able to pay all of its bills on time, including interest on its bonds, Social Security benefits, military salaries, and Medicare reimbursements. This would have serious consequences for the economy, as it could trigger a financial crisis, a credit downgrade, higher interest rates, and lower growth. To avoid a default, Congress needs to raise the debt ceiling before the deadline. But this is easier said than done, as Republicans and Democrats have different views on how to address the nation's fiscal challenges. Republicans want to use the debt ceiling as leverage to demand spending cuts and reforms, while Democrats want to raise it without any conditions attached. This is not the first time that the U.S. has faced a debt ceiling crisis. In 2011, a similar standoff between President Obama and House Speaker John Boehner brought the U.S. to the brink of default and resulted in a historic downgrade of its credit rating by Standard & Poor's. In 2021, President Trump and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi reached a 2-year deal to suspend the debt ceiling until July, but now, President Biden and House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy are locked in a tense negotiation over how to raise the debt ceiling and avoid a default that could harm the economy. Both sides are under pressure from their own parties and from public opinion, which is divided on whether to support or oppose raising the debt limit. Will they be able to reach a compromise before it's too late? Or will they cross the debt ceiling bubble and risk a financial meltdown? Stay tuned for more updates on this developing story. President Biden and Speaker McCarthy have been negotiating for weeks to reach a bipartisan agreement on raising the debt ceiling, but they have different priorities and demands. The debt ceiling is the legal limit on how much the federal government can borrow to pay its bills. If it is not raised by June 1st, the U.S. could default on its debt for the first time in history, triggering a global financial crisis. Biden wants to raise the debt ceiling without any conditions, arguing that it is a routine and necessary step to avoid economic catastrophe. He says he is willing to consider some spending cuts, but not at the expense of vital programs like health care and food assistance. He also rejects Republican proposals to subsidize big energy companies and wealthy tax cheats. McCarthy, on the other hand, wants to use the debt ceiling as leverage to force Biden to agree to deep spending cuts and reforms. He says the U.S. cannot afford to keep borrowing and spending without addressing its long-term fiscal challenges. He also accuses Biden of ignoring the inflation and supply chain problems that are hurting American consumers. The two leaders have met several times in person and over the phone, but so far they have not reached a deal. They are facing intense pressure from both sides of the aisle, as well as from global markets and allies. Some lawmakers have suggested alternative options to avoid default, such as invoking the 14th Amendment or minting a $1 trillion coin. But Biden has expressed doubts about their legality and effectiveness. As the deadline approaches, both Biden and McCarthy say they are hopeful that a compromise can be reached. But they also acknowledge that time is running out and that the stakes are high. Will they be able to bridge their differences and avert a disaster? Or will they fail to act and risk plunging the world into chaos?